I think I'm going to start now, and I'd like to begin by introducing Christine, Dixie, and Helene van Aswegen, who've joined us, and we're so happy to have them here.
Thanks,
I'll begin
Brenda.
with Christine,
Thank you.
who actually needs no introduction, really, partly because we've got your images, so many of them at 33 Twickenham Avenue. So our boardroom, our meeting room, has those amazing images from your master's degree, your early works, which are so special.
Thanks.
And some of your later works are in people's offices. So it's such a treat to have them there.
Thanks,
So we all
Brenda.
kind of know Christine, but let me give the formalities. She's a senior lecturer at Rhodes University, and she specializes in printmaking. Her work is really focused on two broad areas. She's worked with the sort of politics of gender in a lot of works. And she's also looked very self-critically at her own inheritance as the descendant of 1820 settlers and invoked that a lot in her work. So it's a critical engagement with white identities. And she grapples a lot in her work with the difficulty. She has works in loads of public collections. Very pleased to see Karen Milbourne here today. And that's one of the collections that's in the Smithsonian. She's exhibited widely, both here and abroad, so welcome, Christine.
Thanks, Brenda.
And also great welcome to Helene van Aswegen, who's one of these amazing artists, bookbinders, who can't be described as a technician, not because she's not technically amazing, but because she works in such creative ways with artists and in such responsive ways. She has an MPhil in illustration from Stellenbosch University. And she's done amazing collaborations working with artists like William Kentridge, Jerry Kirkin, Hugh Friedrich, and with David Baton, who's with us here today. So the collaboration we're going to hear about today is one that Christine and Helene have done through Spear, and I'm very excited to hear about it. And Christine will be putting up her PowerPoint.
Okay, so that's just the cover of the book that we'll be talking about a bit later. Okay, the next one. And Helene and I were very fortunate to have an opportunity to work at Steers for 3 weeks together on this book. And it was just, it was really wonderful to have that kind of intense time together to progress it. So we'll come back to that a bit later, maybe. Next up, okay. So I wanted to just briefly touch on two other bodies of work that Helene and I have worked on together. The first one was the binding book, which sort of initiated me into the world of book arts. I had to really learn how sculptural a book actually was, how you had to think about the front and the back of the page, the side of the page. I had to learn a new language about end pages, slipcases, paper that folded one way but not the other way. It was really a kind of realization of how three-dimensional a book is and how you've got to think of every aspect of it and how every aspect kind of conveys a meaning. It's nothing is everything has to be thought through in a way, and the materials that you use are part of the concept. So very much like a sculpture, every part has to be considered. And Helene and kind of was a very good teacher in this way. She kind of would suggest things, but also was very good at leaving me to understand how it all worked together. So that was a kind of introduction for me into the world of book art. So the next project we worked on together was called The History of Art, Volumes 1 to 4. And I was, again, experimenting, I guess, with different materials that the possibilities that books can be made out of. And also playing with so the History of Art, volumes 1 to 4 was another iteration of the Tippy King project, which is also where Blueprint for the Disorder of Things is also another iteration of that project. So the History of Art, volumes 1 to 4, was a bit of like a tongue-in-cheek comment on how the history of art has been structured through a very European understanding of what art is. That was kind of the one aspect of it. I was also very interested in the continuing a kind of thought around the idea of art as a trade. And that came from the Santiago Cross series, where Velázquez is very consciously showing his paintbrush and his palette as a statement that painting is worthy of high consideration. So I was playing with the idea of art as a trade, but intersecting that with trade as a kind of the idea of trade being this kind of back and forwards between Europe and Africa as well. So there was a kind of colonial trade going on at the same time. So those were the thoughts, part of the thoughts around this. I was interested in how part of the books, all of the books had mirrors in them as well, so that the viewer was implicated in the reading of this history. Mm. So there's an image of me trying to take a photograph of the book. One of the particular motifs that kind of comes through into the next series that I'll talk about as well is the trade ship. And you can see here in each of the books, there's a ship that kind of floats through the image. This is actually engraved into the mirror, and there's another image of the ship that kind of is on the back side of the book as well. Hard to describe. But yeah, so here's the kind of thing of each of the books. But the last book in this series is called History of Art for Matrix. What I can't remember what I called it.
Sorry.
Sorry?
No, I was just asking if I should continue with this slide.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
The matrix as disorder. So the idea of disorder, I didn't quite realize it until I went back to these now, but the idea of disorder, the matrix, have it being a kind of sense that the whole world is in disorder. The matrix also being related to the mother as a disordered person, which I am. So yeah, that was a series that again was quite experimenting with different materials and a, a further collaboration that Helene and I did together. Helene, I don't know if you want to say something quickly about that.
I think the main thing that I just want to contribute here is the willingness with Christine to explore alternative materials. My main skill set being a book artist, yes, I work with bookbinding techniques, and my main medium is paper. But when it comes to an artist book, you have to interrogate every aspect and every element of the book. So with all of Christine's work, she was really willing to delve into multiple layers of interpretation and exploration. So I was always just, she would come to me and tell me that she has a new idea, and then almost throws a problem towards me, and then I play with it and I play ball and I throw it back to her again, and then the dialogue starts. So for example, with the integration of the tools that you use in the art practice and being self-aware in that regard, and then incorporating that into the book. Maybe the next series will then become, the integration of the binding itself, like very similar, like the book, the binding, playing words with words and the techniques. But I'll let Christine go into further depth with her project.
Okay.
No, yeah.
Yeah. So it can go on to the next one. Yeah. So when we went into lockdown, quite strict lockdown, I decided to use it as an opportunity to go back to some projects that I'd had on the back burner for some time. I seem to always have these projects that I have, but somehow I get distracted into teaching or children or other things take over, and I have them there in the back, and I want to get to them, but somehow never the opportunity to get there doesn't come. So this, I knew that I was going to be in my house, and I thought, okay, let me bring all my etching plates back to my house. Let me see how I can progress this particular project, which had I put to the side for quite a while. So I had etched the whole of the chapter of Las Meninas, which is the beginning of the Foucault's The Order of Things. And I'd also done etching plates of each of the beginning of his chapters of the book. But for the disorder of things, the focus was on the chapter. I used the backs of plates that I'd already used. So each of these plates that you see in front of you has other images from previous series on the backs of them. And I quite like the idea of scrapes and chips and the life of the plate showing through onto these new plates. But what I wanted to particularly talk about here was the relationship between text and image. So I was very challenged by the idea that painting Las Meninas was so much has been written about it. It's such a well-known image, and it is has so many challenging things about it. But equally, the text Las Meninas was very famous in its own right. It really upset the art historians at the time because he didn't follow the rules of talking about how you talk about a painting. So much had been written in response to the essay Las Meninas. So there were these two very famous things, one a text, one an image. And in the text Las Meninas, Helene, if you can go on to the next slide, he writes, but the relation of language to painting is an infinite relation. It is not that words are imperfect, or that, when confronted by the visible, they prove insuperably inadequate. Neither can be reduced to the other's terms. It is in vain that we say what we see. What we see never resides in what we say. So I just found this really something that was quite something to, in a way, work with, maybe. And Helene, if you can go on to the next slide. And the idea that an image could also be words, how to do a mix between what is a word and what is an image, and maybe it's both. So that was quite a way to think about the text and the image coming together in some way. Okay, so if you can just go back, Helene. What I'm wanting to show you here in this slide is there are kind of three protagonists, if you could call them that are part of a blueprint for the disorder of things. The one is a plague doctor, the other is the princess, and the third protagonist is the dog. Which I call the dog is the silent witness, or the creature that observes. Okay, so those three are the three protagonists for the disorder of things, which I'll kind of come back to just a bit later in the talk and show you how I came to that. But for now, I'm going to go back to Tippy King and show you how those figures also came about. So Tippy King is this project that I've been working with for quite a long time. It's kind of resulted in an installation, which was partly stop frame animation and partly sculptural, partly sound. It was quite a big project. But you can see in the one figure is that I'd already started to work with the idea of the figure as text, and the figure of me enacting Velasquez, who's painting, and it's the text that about him. So it was a kind of whole mix of trying to mix figure and text, and the relationship of the painter, who's very self-consciously displaying his craft. So that's the one figure. If you can go on to the next one, Helene. And then the second figure is the princess. So played by my daughter Rosalie. So you can see she was, so the princess is the next figure that kind of comes out of the Tippy King installation. And then the third one that I want to show you is the dog. The dog in Las Meninas, and then the dog that was actually in my Tippy King installation. There, those three figures. Okay. Another figure that appears in the blueprint for the disorder of things is this lying down figure, which is like the figure that floats across the landscape and disappears into the sky, with the dog as silent witness, witnessing this transition. So that I'll also come back to later. Okay, Helene, next one.
This one.
Okay, yeah. So another project that intersects with Blueprint for the Disorder of Things was something that I had begun a while ago again. It was taking the figures from Las Meninas and really making hybrid creatures out of them, thinking about how do I call them? They're images that I made so that I could think about how to make sculptures out of them eventually, which is what I want to do eventually, is turn them into sculptures. Can you go on, Helene? Sorry, Helene, can you move on?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, oh, okay.
One more?
And one more, yeah. So this is my, one of the figures is what I call my plague doctor figure. I became interested in the plague doctor after having read Camus' The Plague. And that was quite a while ago. I just had it on the back of my mind. I wanted to do something with this figure, but I didn't quite know what. And then, if you can go down, Helene, I just want to show you how the plague doctor figure, kind of the composite figure, came together. So the clothes that the plague doctor is wearing comes from the Menina figure in Tippy King. So go back. Helene, if you can go back to that figure.
It seems like there's a lag.
Yeah, okay. So in Foucault's essay Las Meninas, he talks about this Meninas figure as, he says, it's like a donor in prayer, like an angel greeting the Virgin. So this angel figure next to the princess kind of got converted in my mind to the angel of death. So there's a scene in Tippy King where I actually spill this very dark red blood substance over the princess. So there was it's a much darker interpretation of the angel figure. So that was the one part of the composite figure that I worked with. The next, if you can go down, Helene, was this mask that I actually found at the Grahamstown Festival market. There's a person who comes and sells masks mostly from Central Africa, and I had become interested in that when I was very fortunate to go to the Wits Art Museum, and Anitra Nettleton took me into the back rooms and she showed me all the collection that they had there, and I was just so fascinated and enthralled by them. So when I saw these masks at the Grahamstown Festival, I got this one and others as well, but particularly this one. And Anitra told me it was called a White Spirit Maiden mask. So that this particular mask is used as a conduit between the spiritual world and our world. So that idea of this figure that moves between different worlds, between the spirit world and our world, between death and life, which is what the plague doctors also started to represent for me. The idea that, sorry, Helene, can you go on to the next one?
Mm-hmm.
So the other masks that I had encountered were when I went to Venice, and I saw these masks that are in quite a lot of little shops there. They're these specialist mask makers, and the one mask was this plague doctor mask, and another mask was the victim of the plague mask. We can see the pustules on the mask, which I found quite amazing. So not the victim, but the plague doctor mask I combined with the White Spirit Maiden and with the angel figure, and also incorporated. So you can go down, Helene. Helene?
Yeah.
Maybe it's just a lag. Okay, so I this figure, which I incorporated medical instruments onto the mask, medical instruments that go around her waist, the dress of the angel figure. You can see. But this was one figure of maybe about 9 figures that I had started to just try and make these strange creature people out of. But here you can see in the image of the plague doctor, I was quite interested to see that this particular engraving was made in 1656, which was the same year as Las Meninas was painted. So I just thought it was an interesting coincidence. So this figure I went back to during lockdown and started a series of work called Trade-Off. I was listening to Daniel Defoe's Diary of a Plague Year while I was making this work. And I was completely struck how familiar it was what was happening at that time in the plague in London and what we were going through. You know, there were so many similarities. I just was completely struck by, you know, barring, you know, the kind of people keeping indoors scared to. Everyone is a threat. There were so many this kind of terrible feeling of doom. Oh, so many things. It was just really fascinating. But also one of the things that he talks about is the trade-off between infection versus the economy. So in Diary of a Plague Year, there's a particular they have Dutch merchant ships arriving in London, but they can't let the goods off the ship because of fear of infection. So the economy is suffering and people are starving, but they also don't want to risk infection. So the idea of the trade-off between economy and infection, but also the trade-off between word and image, became something that I started to think about. Here in this image, you see detail of the plague doctor figure with kind of creating this wound in the paper. And the paper, you can't see it in this image, but the paper is actually cut and as well. Okay, next one. So here is the figure of the princess. She's kind of has this paint that drips off her brush. So these two figures, if you can go on to the next one, Helene, in the disordered trade-off, there's a sort of narrative which happens, which is that the two figures meet at the center of the image as the series goes along. The pages of the book, the two pages start to fracture apart, almost as if there's a schism or something that is, I almost think of it as like this chasm that started to form as like a rip in the page, but also something that people could fall into. In the background of each of the images is a texture of bandages that runs along. And along the page is a bandage that kind of forms over the page, which becomes almost like a representation of the sea along which the ship is sailing. So the narrative is that the two protagonists, the plague doctor figure and the princess, meet, and then the princess starts to fade off the page as more and more of the ships appear, and the plague doctor becomes much more dominant and eventually becomes the figure that dominates the series towards the end. So that was, you can see in this image here, the plague doctor is now very dark, very kind of really cutting that page. The ships are now like sailing across and through the image, and the princess is starting to fade off towards the side of the image. So that was the series that kind of came before the disorder of things. So here's a detail of the ship sailing across the bandages. And these bandages as well hark back to my use of bandages in the binding, where in the book, the bandages are the things that kind of unite the book in a way. And this is just a detail of, you can see what you can't see in the screen is the embossing that happens on the page. You can just see it a bit here, but the text is much more visible when you can actually see the real thing because of the embossing. Yeah. So now I'm going to talk a bit about Blueprint for the Disorder of Things, which is still in progress. I must tell everyone that it hasn't finished yet. We're still busy with it. But I wanted to talk about it here because it's like uppermost in my mind at the moment. And the way I thought about talking about it was not to do a chronological order, but to pick up on some of the themes that started to develop out of the book. It was quite a strange process because I had all these things that I wanted to work with, but I didn't quite know how they were going to work together. And it was only really when I started working with Helene that some of these ideas became more refined. I've kind of divided it into a few sections. The first one I've called Random Chaos. And it was, I suppose, a reaction to this feeling of how random the virus was, and how the sense of chaos just spilling out onto the world. So the cover of the book, which actually only came quite towards the end of our Prose time at Steers, was a way of, like, we put down some fabric, placed masks on the fabric, and we had this deep blue indigo ink that's literally got splashed over the material, as if there was a sense of chaos, like random spilling of the infection, just kind of being, how can I describe it, just not in control. And the two masks you can see there were what was left after we took the masks off the material. But I quite liked it. They're quite subtle. You can't really see them as much as, you know, they're there, but not too much there.
A residue.
A residue. Thanks. And this was the start of, this is the what we used for the covers. And what was quite nice is that just the little reference on the back of the book to 2020 kind of says it all. So the end pages of the book are also they're quite they have the image, but the image is sort of obscured. Then it's not there's a sense of them kind of coming through the gloom in a way. This is the beginning of the book, and the next slide will be the end of the book, end page of the book. So these are the two end pages that kind of frame the book. And the end, this final page, things have become much more chaotic, spills and blobs and things that kind of have spilt over. So that was the kind of random chaos that was incorporated into the book. The following section I call disruptions. So when we went into lockdown, I found it really hard to concentrate on anything. I'd read and I would find myself reading the same thing over and over again and not really taken it in. It was almost as if I felt as if language had become disjointed. I wanted to. It was as if I was trying to. Language itself is something that had changed in a way, and I didn't know. I was trying to find a visual way of conveying that. So these are images that are there, but things don't always line up, which kind of felt like the way to convey this sense of disruption that had happened in our lives, that things weren't aligned anymore. So there are a few of the images in the book where things are out of alignment. If you can go next one, Helene. So that's you can see more a wider view of the page. The next one. Yeah. And here's another one where if you read, so you can read language, but you have to, but it's sort of out of sync. Everything's out of sync, which is how I was feeling at the time and feeling now. I like everything's slightly out of sync. And here you can just make out the figure of the lying woman. And if you go into the next page, the next image, Helene, you can see there's the whole page where there's this woman lying down. So that was the idea of things, disruptions, things out of sync. The following section, I look at absences. So in the page, on the one page, the woman's actually been cut out of the page. So where you see the prose of the world, yeah, so you can see this has actually been cut out. And if you have to turn the page over, then you see the figure, which is the prose of the world as the figure. So there's several instances where there's literally a figure missing out of the page. Here's another one. This is the one side of the page, and if you turn the page over, there's the figure on the other side. So this idea that people just are suddenly able to be absent, which was and is happening around us at the moment. So by literally cutting out the figure was one way of showing absence, but also removing the figure just through not printing it was the other way of showing absence. So there's several instances of that as well. Here's one example, but also, so the idea is that you can, everything is about how things become very difficult to read. you're reading, but you can't quite read it properly. So here's the figures that are absent. Yeah, and here's another figure that is absent. Where you can just try and make out something, but you can't quite make it out. So this next, one of the next themes that come through in the book is what I've just called infecting. And I suppose like literally the idea is that these flecks are out there and going to are infecting everyone. I was watching one of those things around how, you know, if you touch something and then someone else touches it, and then it's a visualization of how the virus spreads. So I was like, the idea of these little flecks of things everywhere was in my mind when I was doing these images. So here's the idea of, you know, almost as if these one is infecting the next one as they go along. So that was so there's that. The other infection is almost more from on high, like there's
divine intervention.
Divine intervention. There's this godlike hand that's just spilling this infection over everyone. So this hand that's almost disembodied, and you just going to have these little droplets falling all over you. It was the idea behind this. I had this thing that there was these strange, almost surreal like hands that also appear in these what they're called Gothic images, where these hands just float in the air, which I find really wonderful and strange. And I've always loved these floating hands. Yeah, so that kind of comes there. So I spoke a little bit before about how the plague doctor figure I see as something that is ominous, but also has this strange relation to death and the spirit world. And the princess, I suppose you could say, would be the figure that's more representative of youth, life, force, all of that. But at particular instances, these two figures start to merge. So it's as if these figures are not as separate as we think they are. So I've got these two figures now. They're both kind of starting to merge with each other. There's one instance. And the next image, Helene. Yeah, there, yeah. Okay, so here's another image where they start to merge into each other. That's as if they are not separate anymore. So the final kind of theme that I want to talk about is the idea of planets. I just wanted to read something that I found was that in late 1664, this was just before the plague in London, a bright comet was to be seen in the sky, and the people of London were fearful, wondering what evil event it portended. So I felt as if the planets were out of alignment. There was a sense that the world was, that there were these things out of our control that were happening beyond our world even, and that the strange feeling of this worlds colliding, planets not there was things out of sync, out of I don't know how to describe it, but the sense that the planets were influencing our life in a way. So this is where the idea of the planets came in. I have started to sew quite a few of the planets. I've just finished another one today. But what's nice about the sewing is that it's like drawing on both sides of the page at the same time. So you have to kind of be aware that when you're sewing onto the one side of the page is going to show through on the other. And I quite like that relationship. At the final page in my book, but also the page that is on the second chapter of Foucault's book, there was this. The second chapter is called "The Prose of the World," and I just particularly like this thing that he said here. The universe was folded in upon itself, the earth echoing the sky, faces seeing themselves reflected in the stars. So that idea of the face being reflected in the stars, that we are part of this strange universe, was part of what the next image is, which is of the princess painting the moon or painting the planets. Yeah. So I think, so that idea of the planets was part of. I was simultaneously working on another series which I've called Under the Crux, and the crux is another name for the Southern Cross. So it was the idea that we are trying to what's happening below the Southern Cross is part of what's happening with this particular series. And again, I'm just showing it here because when I was sewing these particular planets, it gave me the idea for sewing into the book. Helene had this beautiful gold thread, and she said to me, I think this thread would look really beautiful on these pages. And so I started to sew the Southern Cross line with this gold thread, and then that put that made me feel more confident about sewing into the book. So that's kind of, and people who know some of my older work will see what I did was I took the prints that I'd made from the Gendered Gaze series, and I've literally printed over them to create another, to do something different with it. So in each of these works, which kind of run along in one long narrative, they're like just little glimpses of the story that appear in the bandage area. Yeah. So I think I've spoken enough now, and Helene can take over for a bit.
I'll just briefly tie into the concept of layering and palimpsests that appears quite often in Christine's work. It's not only with the visuals that we are using, but also with the technologies that we are using for the books. So in my case, I understand the Adobe Suite quite well, and I integrate that with my practice. And here we have started talking on a digital level with one another about potential shadows or what else we would like to incorporate into the book. The visit at Steers was only 3 weeks long, so we weren't able to complete the book in 3 weeks' time. Producing a book by hand does take a very long time. So that is when we have to resort to technology to try and communicate what we would like to see in the end. So here I've duplicated the image and then started casting shadows with free transform tools. Christine has also mentioned to me that she wants to bring into the background these mountain-like shapes that the graphs of COVID-19 cases has presented for us that we so often see now in our news feeds, which I think is a lovely element to bring in that COVID reference subtly into the contents of the book, as we have already done so with the cover and the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, of not being able to concentrate and read text properly. And here we have some images of the process of making the book in Steers and also in the bindery. We only had limited access to the bindery due to protocol, so we worked predominantly in the Steers premises, but it's only offices, so we had to work on the floor and sort of make do with toothbrushes and ink to contribute further to the prints that Christine has produced during her stay at home. Here we had a chance to work in the etching studio with permissions and very long protocols, COVID protocols that we had to adhere to, one of which being you have to wear a mask at all times. Only 2 people are allowed in the etching studio. We had to book in advance. So there was a lot of things that we had to take into account. And here we did some airbrushing, which was something I wanted to try out. I've never done it in my life before. And so why not try it out on an artist's work? But there was amazing, trial and errors throughout this process. And I'm just so glad that Christine was willing and game to go with the flow and roll with the punches and explore and make do with what we had. Here in the Steers office, I started binding the book. And on the left-hand side, you can see I used tabs, which is a integral binding method to make a book look more stable. And at that point, I didn't have proper tabs, so we went and we cut up a bag, a linen bag to use as the tab. So once again, make do with what you have. And then when we got to constructing the cover, I had to communicate with her where I would like to see text, and I would then point with my finger, which is a nice reference to the divine hand in the book itself. to where I think we should incorporate some letterpress work or some text. Here's Christine in her studio again when she took the book home to integrate the content further and polish it even more.
This is just plates from the next series that I'm wanting to work on. That's going to be the next one. Yeah, so I've got ideas for it, but still going to be a while.
And that's
us. Yeah.
Thank you so much to both of you for fabulous introduction to the work. So sort of rich and complex. I'm sure there are lots of questions. So I'm going to hand over to people to ask them.
Okay, I can see Philippa.
Yeah,
Hi, Philippa.
Yeah, I've written down some questions, but it got dark, and I can't quite now see my questions. Really comments as much as questions. With the first book that you showed, with a mirror in, and you had photographed the book with the pages just sort of slightly open at that point, but very much closed as well. And it reminded me so much of a daguerreotype, and that with the mirror and that kind of intimate view inside the covers, just like a chink. Did you have that in mind? Because it came across very strongly to me.
No, I mean, it was something that I noticed when I was in the process of making it. It's almost like a secret. Like you can only see the image in the mirror, which is quite a strange. You have to kind of position yourself quite carefully. So it was something that I noticed in the making, but at the time, the concept I was most kind of uppermost in my mind was the idea that the viewer was somehow implicated in this history.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of, we've got many of our ancestors. I don't know about your generation. Well, mind you, Christine, you and I are similar. But my one of my great grandmothers, I only know her face through a daguerreotype. So so I have a kind of relationship with this woman who's hidden, and I find the daguerreotype images so mysterious that and it struck me so powerfully. Looking at your work, that feeling,
that's really interesting.
Well, let's give some other people a turn before I ask another question.
Okay.
Questions? Anybody else?
Joni. Hi, I can see Joni wants to ask a question. Hi, Joni.
Yeah, hi everybody. It's so nice to be able to zoom into these things. And Christine, to see you and see the new work that's coming out of lockdown and how everything kind of collides and crashes and then something comes out of it. So I think I really want to say thank you. And I've got a thought in my mind. It's definitely not yet a question, and I don't quite know what the question is, but there's something that so struck me, Christine, in this book of yours, and it's definitely something that has carried through, I think, all of your work, not only artworks, is the extraordinary tenderness of the representations of your daughter and you, and that kind of mother-child. I know that it comes up a lot in your work, and it's always beautiful, and then also, I suppose, complicated about how that very intimate, personal, and that specific relationship with a mother and a daughter fits in and responds to and translates around these more public or more ethereal, more conceptual, more philosophical kind of realities. And I don't know, I don't know what my question is. Maybe you want to say something about that, but there's also like I kept wanting to know about what Rosalie thought of your work, but I don't think that.
You know,
sorry for the incoherence. But
no, not at all.
Yeah.
That the Tippy King project, which involved Rosalie so centrally, she was 5 and 6 at the time. So she, it was really an amazing time to explore. It was like dressing up, and I mean, I'm sure sometimes she was completely irritated with me, making her do some strange things, but she remembers it incredibly fondly. As a time which we really spent a lot of intense time together. So now this new body of work, she's in her own life. She's not particularly interested in mine anymore. To be honest, it's like mom in the corner doing her thing, and I've got much more interesting things to do. So right now she's moved on. I'm tolerated, but she's not so interested anymore. It's
maybe
strange.
there's something about seeing like a layer of fantasy gets overlaid onto the stories when you see it through a child's eyes or through the presence of a child.
Yeah.
There's something.
I mean, I do think there's something.
Wonder.
But I do think there's something in the narrative itself that's quite. It's quite like one of those dark fairy tales.
Exactly.
It's like a dark fairy tale in a way. I mean, I think our lives at the moment are like a dark fairy tale.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's no script.
There's no script. Absolutely. I mean, I felt like I was sunk.
It's really nice.
Something like that. Yeah.
Could I maybe ask about picking up on that? The copy blue you use is so evocative. I was sort of thinking, well, it's obviously got connotations of the universe. It's got Renaissance connotations.
Absolutely.
Anything more? How did you arrive at that? And what were your thoughts?
Okay, so I mean, the idea of the blueprint is the idea of the architectural structure of something, and the blueprint for something that's it's a kind of structure, but the blue. And Las Meninas, the chapter Las Meninas is in a way could be seen as a blueprint for the rest of the book, of the order of things. So it kind of tied into the idea of the blueprint, and then the idea of indigo, which is the kind of blue that I used and is particularly a brilliant, beautiful, rich, evocative blue, has also this incredible history around trade. So how the trade of indigo, kind of came from the east and traveled. It's kind of this incredible trade that of a color that went all over the world. So I had a tin of this beautiful blue ink that I'd been saving up to print with when the day came, and then the day came. So that was the the start of using that blue. But what was interesting as well is when we actually started working in the book and having to do the spraying, how many different kinds of this blue there are. It wasn't just one blue that
very
started
hard
to merge.
Match it.
So in the book, and when the final version of the book, you'll see there's quite a lots of different blues that happen. Yeah, so the blue, but it's just when we printed that one page, the end page of this, it was this very, very dark blue at the edges, and then these different ranges of blue in the middle. And it was just, I was so happy because these blues just were so beautiful. They were just beautiful, yeah. Yeah, beautiful something of something terrible. I don't know. It's a funny. Yeah.
Can I ask another one?
Sure.
When I was intrigued with this, the images, sort of silhouette images of figures, and then you'd run text over it, and you were talking about the sort of disparate nature of the image and the text, and I found myself dying to know what the relationship between the text and the image was in terms of, do you when you choose text, is it just a random choice to put over within that las meninus writing, or do you really scout through the text and find specific sentence fragments that will suit that image? So is it the specific references, or is it the textiness of the text in general that interests you when you make that decision?
So when I started off thinking about it, I thought I would be very specific about which text I used.
Yeah.
But I actually found it really difficult to control that.
Yeah.
And there are, within the book, there are moments where the text and the figures have some sort of very specific relationship, but there are more cases where it's actually quite random in some ways. Yeah.
And
so,
the little, sorry.
No.
The little images that you do manage to make out, to sort of pick out, they of course then are randomly subverting the images, which is a rather nice concept. The loss of order, the out of controlness of it.
It was the death of the author.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Working visually. And responding to it, to what you see.
Other questions?
Christine?
Yes.
To pick up actually on Joni's comment here in the text about the chat about the floating hands, one of our students just sent me a WhatsApp message and says she can't connect to the audio. She's typed out a message to ask you if you don't mind. This is Angelique, one of our students, and she says, "Hi Christine, thank you for the incredible presentation. I really love your work. I use hands as a motif in my sculptures made from bone glue and spices, and I'm really interested in your metaphor of hands. I was hoping to ask you if you could speak to some of their associations."
So just about all of the figures are holding something, mostly a paintbrush. So the actual hand is holding a paintbrush, which is then doing something on the page, like literally drawing a line or splattering something. There are times when the hand wields a scythe and literally cuts the paper. I'm trying to think what else the hands do. They are the conveyors of I'm just trying to think. The hands basically control the narrative in a way, you could say. Because the faces are often quite blank, but the hands are the things that create the action.
That's quite interesting, because they can become, quite disembodied. The hands that float, like you spoke about the Gothic hands, the hands in the Victorian seance that scuttle across the table.
Yes.
Even
Lovely.
like in the Addams Family, that hand, which is a character in its own, which might speak to the chaos of the narrative that we're all living through now. The hand that creates, but at the same time it infects. Touch surface, touch your face, don't touch yourself.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
When you take the hand away from the body, that dissociation to me is really quite interesting, because to create, the hand has to be attached to the arm, which is attached then to the physical body to manipulate, but then to the mind to conceive and to have the divine creativity come through the hand. And then when you detach it, that's quite
exactly. Yeah, exactly like that. Yes. I see David wants to ask a question.
Hi, I couldn't help but segue in via the hands, because I have this wonderful artist's book that Helene made with me, and I just wanted to just applaud the concept of working together in order to realize an idea in a project. And just for example, I just wanted to show you that this was Helene's idea for me, to open in a gatefold, which requires in this box, to access a book of hands, to use both hands to open the box. Now,
so clever.
That was something that Helene caught onto almost immediately. I had just said to her, I need a box, I need some kind of container, this thing will collapse.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is I just want to applaud Helene's incredible, nuanced understanding of artists' projects. Far more than mere technical craftsmanship. Helene is a craftsperson of note, but she gets the project, she gets the artist's
sensibility. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm saying Helene, because you are an artist, and I just want to applaud you and ask you to perhaps talk a little bit more about the kind of technical, conceptual interweaving and zipping into that happened, because I read it all over your project, this interzipping.
Yes, absolutely. I just want to kind of give I think Helene must speak to this one, but I just wanted to say, while we were at Steers together, I'd go to bed and I'd think, my mind would keep going, and then I'd wake up in the morning and literally before breakfast, I'd say to Helene, I've been thinking, and she'd know that there was a whole thing coming. And she was incredibly tolerant of all my ideas. But I think Helene must speak to this one. But it's been, so rewarding to work with someone who just gets it. Yeah, he just gets it.
Thank you for the kind words, both of you. Yes, I think the first thought that comes to mind is the understanding, or I can summarize it into one word, and that is empathy. It is being able to put yourself in the shoes or the hands of the artist that you work with. And to me, I sort of for a second then thought of the marionette, someone sort of in the background helping to get the show up and get it to be as understandable and receptive for our audience readers. So I just enjoy being the interpretive vessel in a way. So yeah, I think empathy is the main thing for me.
Thank you so much. I mean, there's clearly been such fantastic synergy between you on this project. You know, I'm so interested with Christine's work, which I've written about a lot. Is always about, you mentioned language, but it's always about unspoken things that can't be articulated. It's actually quite hard to write about them because they can't be articulated. But be that as it may, I think in this case, Helene really gets that as well. And that sensibility is kept there in this project. So it's almost like an enrichment of it from this working relationship. Thank you so much for being here to share this with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much,
Brenda. Thanks, Brenda.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot, everyone, for coming. Okay.
And good luck for further projects.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, Philippa.